My name's Judy Radul. I'm the coordinator of the Audain Visual Artist in Residence program. And the first thing we're going to do tonight is we're very honored to have Tsleil-Waututh Elder Margaret George here with us, and she's going to give us a welcome and an acknowledgement. So that's how we're going to start off, and then we'll proceed. So I'm going to introduce Margaret. Margaret George has been honored for a lifetime of visionary work around education and community service. She was honored with the Gertie Gertrude Visionary Award. She's worked on the Downtown East Side for more than 20 years. She was a founding member of the Native Education College. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in anthropology from UBC, a diploma in chemical addictions program, and a certificate of achievement from the Justice Institute of BC. So with that, Margaret, will you stand up and she's gonna talk to you.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah? Everybody back there? Okay. So this was quite exciting. I wasn't expecting to be here tonight. I thought I was going to be here tomorrow night. One of them days. Rainy out, and I wasn't ready to go out, and we had an early supper, thank goodness. And I looked at my calendar, and my calendar was dated to either Saturday, Sunday, or Monday. I wasn't sure. So I phoned a number, and lucky they phoned back. We had a few minutes to get our act together, my son and I. So here we are. So welcome to the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and welcome to this event. I enjoyed last week's event. It was very interesting and very sort of out of the box for us, not listening to something that we listened to last week. Very interesting. And so a quick prayer and we'll get this evening going. Great Spirit, thank you for bringing us together this evening. Just guide each and every one of us in the path that we're on, letting us always remember that we are the leaders and the mentors of those who follow us, those who witness what we do and what we say. I ask Great Spirit to bless each and every one of you from where you come from, your families and your friends as well, all my relations. Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you so very much, Margaret. Great to have you with us for both these events. Yeah, as I know a lot of you here, so thank you for coming. Nice to have you here. As I said, my name's Judy Radul. I'm a professor in the visual art area here and the coordinator of the Audain Visual Artist in Residence program. And this fall, together with the SFU Galleries and Gallery Curator Cheyenne Turians, we've been able to have Raven Chacon here in Vancouver for kind of like a month now. And we've done a lot of things. One of the things is Raven's in the exhibition downstairs that you might have seen called The Relations of Responsibility. It's a group show. What else have we done? We did a lot of things. Margaret was there last week when we had the 6th day, I guess, of our performance workshop, of our workshop series where we were working on looking at scores. And I'm sure some of what Raven will show you will be the scores that he writes for music and then or for performance, and that's also what's in the exhibition downstairs. So we had 5 days of workshops and then a one afternoon presentation of the scores that were done by students and participants, and we did some of Raven's scores as well. And there were been talks, and then last night was a big night because we had a listening event at the Western Front. Thank you very much to the Western Front and Aram Bajakian, who helped organize and have Raven and Gabby Dowd together, and as well as himself talking about playing tracks and talking about music. It was really great and relaxing. And then we got up and went down to Fuse at the VAG, where Raven played a noise set at about 11 p.m., and it was amazing. And here we are today, and today is the last formal event anyways in Raven's residency. So it's also a time to say thank you so much, Raven, for giving us so much of your time and creative energy. So it's going to have a lot of effects, I know, for weeks and months and years to come. We'll have students thinking about making scores and different things from this experience. So Raven Chacon is so what's going to happen is I'm going to introduce Raven. Raven's going to come up and talk about his work. Then I'm going to introduce Jeneen Frei Njootli and Aram Bajakian, and I won't introduce myself, but I will also get in one of these chairs, and we're going to have a chat with Raven based on his presentation, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. So to introduce Raven Chacon is a composer, performer, installation artist from Fort Defiance, Navajo Nation. As a solo artist and as a collaborator with Post Commodity, Chacon has exhibited and performed at the Whitney Biennale, at Documenta 14, Red Cat in LA, Musée d'Art Contemporain in Montreal, San Francisco Electronic Music Festival, End Times Festival, the Sydney Biennale, and the Kennedy Center. Every year he teaches 20 students to write string quartets for the Native American Composer Apprenticeship Program, and he's a recipient of the United States Artists Fellowship in Music, the Creative Capital Award in Visual Arts, the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation Artist Fellowship, and the American Academy's Berlin Prize for Music Composition. He lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and recently, Toronto, Ontario. So I'm going to welcome Raven to come up here now. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming today. Thank you, Margaret, for your words of wisdom and for checking the calendar. And thanks, Cheyenne, for inviting me to be in the exhibition downstairs. I encourage everyone to go down and visit. Will it be open after this? Yeah, so it'll be open after this talk. And some of the scores that I'll be talking about, they are downstairs, and you can learn more about those. And thanks to Cheyenne and Judy for having me this month. It's been a really nice time. I really packed it in. So I want to thank Judy for having this format be just a 30-minute talk and then a dialogue and who knows what else. So I'll just start. I always start with this piece of work. It's probably one of the first works that I ever did, and it's still a good one to include in PowerPoints because it still explains a lot of what I do, all in one piece. It's a series of field recordings that I made in 1999, going to places that I thought to be very quiet places in the Southwest, some of them on the Navajo Reservation where I grew up, and trying to find, going to these places many times, trying to find the time of day when it was quiet, or the most quiet, when there was no people around and no cars, no planes in the sky. Trying to go there on a day when it wasn't windy, see what part of these places had the, more sonic quality of silence. And so, for instance, Window Rock, Arizona, which is kind of the capital of the Navajo Nation, that was the first one I went to and made a quiet recording, field recording of this place. I buried a DAT recorder in the ground and put a microphone about 30 feet away to ensure I didn't even pick up the sound of the DAT recorder, and made a recording of this place on a quiet day. I then went back to the studio for each of these recordings, went back to the studio and turned the recording up to its maximum. Usually we play these about 7 times louder, but you get the idea. This is the Sandia Mountains, where Albuquerque, New Mexico is at the base of this mountain, and it's a place I consider home, a place where I go on hikes in the foothills of these mountains. This is what this recording sounds like. These are just excerpts of much longer recordings. And this is Canyon de Chelly, Arizona. This is very close to where I grew up. I grew up in a town, Chinle, Arizona. And you see here this rock. This is a rock called Spider Rock, where in our stories a spider woman lived up there, taught Navajo people how to weave. I made the recording, probably I was back here somewhere making this. Funny enough, my wife Candace Hopkins was here 2 nights ago giving a talk that has a bunch of my same slides in it. So I had to redo a whole new PowerPoint for you all. I'm kidding because we do a joint talk sometimes, and so a lot of this is aligned, and we're very much interested in the same things. But this slide, for those who were here the other night, I think she showed this one. In 2016, I went to the Standing Rock Gathering that happened in the Standing Rock Reservation, the Hunkpapa Nation, where people had gathered to protect the water from the encroaching pipeline. I went with my friend Chanupa Hanska Luger, who's a visual artist based in Santa Fe, but he's from that community, and he was making regular trips back and forth, and I wanted to go. He invited me to go with him. I wanted to go for a variety of reasons, to go support the water protectors, also to find out what was happening. You know, I was hearing all this crazy chatter on social media, and I couldn't decipher the truth out of all this. So I wanted to go for myself to learn firsthand what was happening. And I also, Candace talked about this device, this long-range acoustic device, sonic weapon. I was doing research at the time for an installation that Post Commodity was working on for Documenta 14, using these as musical instruments. I'm not going to talk about that piece today, because I think in addition to, I never got the LRAD turned on me at Standing Rock, by the way, maybe for the better, but other things were happening at Standing Rock. One of them also being what Candace talked about the other day was I always, when I can, carry a recording device on me just to make field recordings. Not like an anthropologist does, because I don't really have the time to listen back to them. I hope I capture something, It's like, I don't know. It's like having the camera on your dashboard in case you see a car accident. Maybe that's the idea. I don't know. I wasn't there to capture. I was there not there to really find those instances. What I started finding was instances of silence, all for different reasons. Whether it was people in prayer, and these being these moments where you heard breaks in between all of the anger that people were expressing at the gathering. You also heard moments of rest, people taking time for themselves to relieve themselves of protesting and working out there at the gathering. And what Candace talked about the other night was this instance where the bridge there leading to the lake had been barricaded early on in the Standing Rock Gathering, and it was a meeting point where people would go engage the police and the private security. A powerful moment happened almost to the day. Yeah, almost to the day 3 years ago, around Thanksgiving was when this was, that the elder women of the camp had decided to go just confront the private security and the police and just stare at them in silence, having perhaps looking at them as with disappointment and why they would be encroaching onto these lands. And so, again, this is a repeat of the wonderful presentation a couple of days ago, but this is a recording from that moment of at least 700 people being quiet. But Candace spoke so well about that moment, I'm not going to go into that. But what it left me was, at the time, I was working on a string quartet and also had been working on these scores that are exhibited downstairs. And in this moment, I was thinking about how these women who had been the people we were looking up to in the Standing Rock Water Protector Camp had led us. We had followed them out to this point in the bridge. And so it inspired me in the string quartet that I was making, which was a commission from the Kronos Quartet that I had been working on, called The Journey of the Horizontal People. The Journey of the Horizontal People is a string quartet commissioned by Kronos Quartet. The piece is designed so that the players become lost from each other as the music progresses through time. It requires that the quartet include a woman so that she can realign the group when they lose their way. The Journey of the Horizontal People is a future creation story, telling of a group of people traveling from west to east, across the written page, contrary to the movement of the sun, but involuntarily and unconsciously allegiant to the trappings of time. With their bows, these wanderers sought out others like them, knowing that they could survive by finding these other clans who resided in the east, others who shared their linear cosmologies. It is told that throughout the journey, in their own passage of time, this group became the very people that they were seeking. So as you can see here, measures are different lengths. Some people are told to repeat a measure 6 times, others 7 times. Some people speed up while others slow down. They're going to get lost. And then this symbol here, as I was saying, is a moment when the woman in the quartet says, "Come back together and realign on measure," what is that, 70 or something. If there's more than one woman in the group, which is hopefully the case, then the eldest woman does that action. Because it's only 30 minutes, I just picked a few pieces to talk about. And for 10 years, I was part of a collective called Post Commodity, which is a collective of indigenous artists based in the Southwest. It's gone through different membership over the years, but each member had come from a different, not only tribal background, but also different artistic background, different skill sets that they brought to the collaborative. The biggest project we worked on while in that group was, and throughout the different membership of the collective over the span of its life, was this project involving these objects here. This is an object called a scare eye balloon. This is a screenshot from Amazon. And these are bird repellent products that you're supposed to put in your tree to scare away birds. And Post Commodity was really interested in these objects. And we saw them as this kind of indigenous ready-made, if you will. We were fascinated by the shape, the concentric circles, the geometry. To each of us in Post Commodity, it had different meaning. For myself, when I looked at these, there was a reference to emergence, worlds of emergence, where you might be coming from the center and keep coming up into the world that we're in now. Other members of the group saw significance in the colors, representing different medicine or different plants from where they're from and used in their ceremonies. And also it's become the slogan of these things by now, but we had this thing we would say about these. We would say if a 10-inch diameter balloon can scare away pigeons, then a 10-foot diameter balloon can maybe ward off Western civilization. And so we started making giant versions of these balloons and flying them as guerrilla actions over contested spaces. So this one here was flown in Phoenix over Sheriff Joe Arpaio's jail and office in downtown Phoenix, Arizona. Sheriff Joe Arpaio being the racist sheriff of Maricopa County who was found guilty of violating civil rights for pulling over people just because they looked Mexican, which included a lot of just anybody brown, really. Here's another one, a black version we made for the Manitoba Hydro building in Winnipeg, Canada. So these became, art events, guerrilla actions, but also tests for us. We were wanting to find out how these balloons acted when they were in the sky, how much helium they needed, how much that would cost to fill one up, how long it would fly, what people's reaction was. Was it something that they were afraid of or felt threatened by? Did they think it was some kind of surveillance? Our plan for these balloons, though, was a much greater project than just the guerrilla actions. Wanting to respond to one of the few tribal communities in the Southwest, the Tohono O'odham, and their situation of having relatives on both sides of the border who are both federally recognized, both by the United States and the Mexican government, yet having this U.S.-Mexico border fence dividing their families. We wanted to make a line of these balloons that would intersect the U.S.-Mexico border. Not only intervening within the border, but also tracing longitudinal relationships between people, animals, water, and the land itself. So this area here, this kind of brown area, is the Tohono O'odham Reservation. The map doesn't ever show Mexico. Like it's some kind of just no person's land down there. But if there was a similar graphic, you would see this reservation extending down into this area as well. And so we went over there and talked to tribal members. In fact, my godmother is from that community. And they said, we really love your idea. We think it's beautiful, but come, let's go take a drive. So we jumped in the car and we went down to here, San Miguel. And they said, the guy who was showing us around said, look at this cactus over there. Cactus is like in cartoons. And this one had a hole in it. Figured, an owl or something had made a hole in it. But he said, look at that cactus. And sure enough, there was a camera inside of this cactus. So he said, I think you can understand why we don't want any more eyes around here. And so we understood. We really wanted to do this piece in Arizona because of the policies of the state, it being one of the few red states on the West Coast, and its racist governor and sheriff. We couldn't do it west of here because of this Air Force range. We couldn't do it right here because that's a bird sanctuary. We kept going east. This area, Sierra Vista, is a place, if you look on the, they track these things now, I guess, looking for hate groups across the United States, you'll see a big red blotch right there of Minutemen, vigilantes, anti-Mexican, anti-immigrant hate groups, all live in that area of Sierra Vista. We wanted to do it there. So we started going down there with these balloons. People would drive by us with their guns out the window. And we met this guy, this veteran, and I'm in a different country now, today, so I can say all this stuff, but I don't give the same presentation in the Southwest. But he said that the cartel, the Minutemen people maybe were working with the cartel. They might do something like, get on their walkie-talkies and their camouflage and their night vision goggles in the middle of the night and say, hey, I saw some people crossing the border, calling Border Patrol. Come over here, and sure enough, over there, the cartels are running whatever they run. So in cahoots. So we decided not to do it over there. We weren't really afraid necessarily. We just didn't want that to be our audience. Who are we doing this for? Are we always just reacting to these people? Even if we might be repelling them with the piece, the piece wasn't for them. And while we were about to give up, we kept going east. A friend of ours, a video artist named Jeneen Sanchez, she and her husband run a coffee shop in this town of Douglas. Douglas isn't even on the damn map here, but Agua Prieta is. Agua Prieta is the sister city in Sonora. And we just stopped to get a coffee, and she said, why don't you do it here? Do your project here. I can introduce you to the mayor. Such a small town. And we said, yeah, sure. And we ended up meeting the mayor of Douglas. We went to the other side, and the mayor of Agua Prieta was very interested in this project. And then we realized what this piece was. It was to be a suture between two communities that had been split up. Very much like the Tohono O'odham narrative, but this was a situation where the community itself could help us solve the problems of even installing the piece. All of the logistics and all of the problems that go along with that were aided by the community. So in October of 2016, we were able to put up the repellent fence. A 2-mile-long land art installation, 1 mile on the US side and 1 mile into Mexico, flying at roughly an average of 100 feet high, 26 balloons. and flying for a duration of 4 days. Back on to discussions about scores. This is the last piece I did with Post Commodity. This was last year. Just briefly, I'll talk about this piece. A piece commissioned for the Carnegie International in the city of Pittsburgh. A lot of Post Commodity's interest was trying to use these traditional art forms, and for myself, looking at Navajo sand painting. Not that I'm in a position to make a traditional sand painting, but the form itself was something that I was interested in. And so what this piece is a piece using steel, coal, and glass, three materials that are significant and represent the history of the industrial work that had been done in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh being noted for its steel industry. And with that, the coal needed to fire these furnaces, and then the outcome of all of this steel turning into buildings, skyscrapers, and having all of this glass. But with this industry, there was also a recognition of the strong music tradition as we were spending time in Pittsburgh. A strong jazz tradition where people were coming through on a touring circuit. People were staying because there was jobs. And people kind of forming the music community around the industry that was happening there at the turn of the century. And so what this is a graphic score read from above, using the columns of the Hall of Sculpture there to demarcate things like key signature or volume or density of the material being played. So this is a trombonist and also conch shell player, Aaron Johnson, very well-known jazz musician and improviser. He's collaborated with George Lewis, and he also teaches at Pitt University there in Pittsburgh. I think I have a video here of him performing the score. A short excerpt. Too short. Hopefully Post Commodity updates their website and uploads a more appropriate one. Back in 2000, I think it was 2007, I was part of a group of composers in the States, Native American composers. There was very few of us at the time who had gathered to try to find others like us and try to make a website database, finding all the Native people in the United States who were interested in dedicating their lives to, for lack of a better word, classical music. I guess I could say notated music, but maybe that's not even true. Maybe just new music in some way. And the elder of that group was a composer named Lewis Ballard. I think he's Kiowa, and maybe Osage was his tribal membership. And he was always considered to be maybe the first Native composer. He passed away about 10 years ago. Beautiful man, but I was thinking, he can't be the first. I know him, There's got to be somebody before him. And so in doing research, I had found this woman. Her name is Zikalesha. known for writing an opera back in, I think it was 1920 or so, around the time Louis Ballard was born. And so, as far as I can tell, she's known as perhaps the first Native American composer. And so I wanted to write a dedication to her, like a very large work, symphonic work, and had started working on that, and had started researching her biography and learned a whole lot of fascinating information about Zikalasha. Also, Zikalasha means redbird in Lakota language. And she had also been an activist, had been a writer of poetry and fiction, also political commentary. She had gone around the country and given a lot of speeches on the rights of American Indian people at the turn of the century. And she was also a teacher, a violinist, and a composer. And the more I had researched her life, had spoken to Yankton Dakota people, which is the tribe she's from, and other Lakota people, learned that not everybody agreed with Zikalasha. In fact, she was quite polarizing to a lot of people. At the turn of the century, this woman with a very vocal presence and strong presence, strong ideas, perhaps it rubbed some people the wrong way. For instance, it was very complicated that she was trying to get Native people the right to vote, which sounds good, but this is at a time when Native people don't even want to be citizens of the United States that they're trapped inside of. Perhaps it was a contract that they're signing if they're going to be allowed the right to vote. Also, early in her life, she was very much against residential school, but later in life had conceded that there was some benefit to young people going that path. And this, of course, some people viewed as a hypocritical action. Other things she was outspoken about was that perhaps some of this medicines, things like peyote, in some tribes that didn't traditionally use peyote, some of this abuse she had seen of this medicine was something that perhaps should be regulated, and this was in contrast to a lot of tribes seeking religious freedoms at the time. So I abandoned the symphonic work. This is too complicated for me to speak about. Instead, I wanted to consider what contemporary Indigenous women composers living in the 21st century have to navigate and negotiate, and what their lives are about. So this brings us to the scores that are downstairs, the scores we can talk more about. An ongoing project. I put 2019, but it's really been since, like I said, 2007, and it's still not finished. 8 of these are finished for now. And they're in the form of one-page graphic scores. Not all graphic, I think some will be text. I'll explain each one briefly. For Laura Ortman. This is to be played on any string instrument at different speeds. There's when the slashes go the other way, that means do an opposite action to what you're doing already. And then the grace note is even one more conflicting action. For Suzanne Kite, who is also a violinist, funny enough, like Laura and like Zikalasha. But Suzanne's work is more dedicated to new media, building new instruments, electronic instruments, coding, installations, and applications for music. So this is a piece for values of numbers. It can be played on any instrument. And as you see here, integers and positive integers and negative integers. One follows the path interpreting these integers. For Suzanne, she relayed to me a lot of concepts about Lakota worldview and numerology and also geometry. For Barbara Crowell, this is a piece about survivance. Barbara Crowell is one of my favorite composers in the world. Lives in the Toronto area. She's Odawa, from that nation. And this is for playing the flute as long as possible. For Cheryl Larondel, who I'm sure many of you know, singer, activist, educator, and this is for singing, composing new songs, or composing one song in 5 parts, using these dots as a guideline for either the larger form of the melody or using them as the actual melody. The only request is that the song itself is in the form of advice and sung in the dark. For Autumn Chacon. Autumn is my sister. She is a sound artist. She's been interested in sound and composition as long as I have, I think, and she's still 10 years younger than me. She was in that photo where you saw the teepees up at Standing Rock. She was up on that hill. She has done work where she, in the early days, was building radio transmitters and giving them to small Native communities so that they could have, some radio communication and access to radio. Later, doing work where she was getting FCC licenses and helping communities get legitimate, recognized FCC radio stations. This is for lamps and radios to be positioned in the corners of a room or a city or a nation, and one goes around turning on and off the lamps and radios. Meanwhile, tracing the path that the solo performer has traversed and then composing a song to be sung in wherever those lines intersect. For Jacqueline Wilson is a Yakima bassoonist who is somebody who went the path of academia and has always, in the back of her mind, felt this conflict of having to leave her family and go study far away. This is for timbral changes. So when you see the very first circle, that means play the note normally. You play the note normally on the second row, and then you find an alternate fingering for that same note or pitch. And so on, oscillating between the normal modes of playing and alternate fingerings. Each time you do that, it sounds slightly different. It shapeshifts, but you're always reaching back to the original fingering. When you get to the bottom, you turn the page on its side, and you just play alternate fingerings until the very end when you play it normally again, but you don't remember what it's supposed to sound like. This is for Carmina Escobar, an opera singer and vocalist in Los Angeles. I was asking Carmina, I said, I don't know any mestiza no, I should rephrase. I don't know any indigenous women composers in Mexico. Can you help me? And she told me what I already know, is that mestizo and mestiza people in Latin America aren't always encouraged to speak about their indigeneity or know about where they came from. They are the newest people, perhaps, and they are the product of erasure. So I wrote a piece for Carmina talking about that. And so this is for screaming as quiet as possible. And lastly, for now, is a piece for a violinist. Interesting how many violinists are involved in this. A violinist from Alaska, a Nupiaq scholar and musician Heidi Senungatuk. This calls for the solo performer who takes on this score to compose a melody on the first line using this score. Then take a second sheet of paper and trace the dots. Then put that piece of paper behind the score and apply it to the other staves underneath, drawing them back in, and then playing the new melody as it has to bend to the other systems. Thanks.
I'm sure that you both have thoughts about Raven's work or how it connects to things you're thinking about. And anybody got a starting point for us? Anybody want to jump in? Question, comment?
I was thinking when looking at the pieces downstairs how, like the song work to write 5 songs, like 5 songs, like infinity is in that idea. You know, there's like one song, it could be about anything almost, right? Like the whole history of songwriting is in that idea. But it's also so specific. It's 5 songs. It's not 4 or 6. So it's just really interesting kind of like line that it's going between being very specific and yet allowing the performer to do anything in a way.
Yeah, that one in particular, and thinking about Cheryl and my friendship with Cheryl, and thinking that it can be as micro as needed musically, that this shape could be interpreted like that, as if it was just the dots themselves being in that order or that contour, and then also broadened out into their larger form like that as well. But then also I think on that one there's not even a duration really specified, so giving Cheryl, I guess in that case, the freedom to elaborate on her own advice to whoever she's giving advice to.
Thanks for the introduction. And thanks for sharing about your work, Raven. It's cool to get to hear you talk about your work in different settings over the span of years. And it always brings different perspective and like appreciation for the work that you're doing. So merci Cho for that.
Yeah, thank you.
And when did you start to pay attention or like develop in your practice the difference between listening and hearing?
That question comes up a lot in like composer panels and things like that, like listening and hearing and what the definition of those are, right? And hearing, I don't know if I'm always hearing. I think I'm interested as a listener of music to we were actually talking about this last night. We did the listening session at Western Front about listening to things multiple times, or how much information is encoded in music, and does it mean something if something is different every time you listen to it? Does that mean it's more complicated? Does that mean it's a better piece of music? And I don't know the answer to that, but I think a goal of mine is to try to think about that as I'm composing. Like think about if there's an opportunity for it to change over time. Maybe that's why I go the route of something that is slightly indeterminate, like these kind of scores you saw. Or another tactic would be that maybe there's so much to the technique involved that it can't possibly be played the same every time. So I'm trying to answer your question. I don't know when. I mean, I think there was a shift in having objective ideas about a piece of music, and then thinking, well, it doesn't always have to be that. The piece of music itself might be a container for other kinds of experiences, and it's not always a sonic one, perhaps. Maybe it's something more temporal, or something more as maybe even a shared experience amongst the people playing or the audience involved.
Can I follow up on that then? Because I don't know if this is what you were thinking about at all, but those first early works that you presented, the clips about silence, but they're also noise. So I was really trying to think a bit about this, this idea of silence as a form, or noise as a form of silence, or silence as a form of noise, or again, it's, I guess, it's not the most interesting thing to create definitions of those two things, but to think about, what that space, I guess silence is a kind of space of listening, and how we tune ourselves. Like, it's almost like we would attenuate our listening up that high to listen in the silence, but you've done it through processing. So I don't know if you...
Yeah, so that piece was to, of course, to let the land sing, but to magnify, this place by amplifying it. But at the same time, that led to maybe other work. Maybe that's when the shift occurred is, well, am I an anthropologist? Am I really trying to hear all of its detail? Am I staring at the land with my ears? Or am I trying to have it have its own voice, do this other thing? Is it okay that it can hide itself in its own information? So that became interesting, that fidelity was no longer important for some of this,
Right, and if field recordings are taking a sonic image of a place, then it makes sense that would sound different to different people, or that your own listening positionality would affect what kind of a field recording you would make. Dylan Robinson, who's a really rad Stolo thinker, writer, curator. He talks about listening positionalities in a text of his called Hungry Listening, which is in a forthcoming book. A little unintentional plug for Dylan. But in that, he talks about, sovereignty, a sovereignty of our senses, and that the sovereignty of a sounder doesn't guarantee the sovereignty of a receiver, of a listener.
Yeah, I don't know. I got to read his book, I guess. But no, Dylan is great. Dylan is one of the few people, in addition to Candace, who is thinking about how all of this also intersects with Indigenous art and Indigenous sound making, and the sovereignty of listening, the sovereignty of context, yourself as being a participant in that, in that experience.
Oh yeah, and he also talks about how the more that we try to define what listening is, the harder, the more, or when we talk about trying to decolonize the way that we listen, the slipperier that thing becomes in trying to decolonize, or even into naming it. I feel noise is...
Yeah, that's why it's so hard to talk about this stuff, right? It's really, that's why musicians play music, because, we don't know how to talk about this kind of other thing happening in the stars.
How did you come up with some of the techniques for the string quartet?
This was mentioned in the bio. Since 2004, I've been doing this program where I teach young people to write string quartets in my home community, the Navajo Nation, also in the Hopi Reservation and the Salt River Pima Nation in southern Arizona. So I go out for a month in August every year, and I don't play the violin. I tried to play the cello once, but I don't own a cello. I own a cheap violin I bought in Mexico for $20. And I take this over to these schools and I show them, it's like a guitarist showing them how to play. violin. But it's cool because they're all guitarists too, you know, they're like heavy metal kids. Or aspiring rappers or whatever. Some of them are very well versed in their traditional music also. But I think it came from years and years of showing them how to try to make sound and noise with, you know, this violin. And, you know, I'm trying to play it correctly and I play it wrong. And then I go, oh, I'm gonna use that in the Kronos Quartet thing. Really, that's no joke. So that's, you know, you write these things down, you play on your instrument and you stumble upon something and then you like it or you develop it. And it doesn't end there. It's not like I know what I'm doing and that's it. You bounce ideas. You find somebody who actually plays these instruments and say, well, can you try this? Okay, that sucked. Can we try this? Can we do this thing? And I mean, it also helps. I'm a guitarist also, so it's there is some similarity in these techniques, but some of them are sonic ideas. It's not, I don't think any of this is in the Kronos piece, but I have a piece for cello. I have a series of pieces for cello, solo cello, about hunting, about singing to ask for an animal to come let you kill it. The same song is also the song apologizing for killing it. The piece after that I wrote is actually using the cello like a bow, like you pull with your finger this way. Or you pull as if the deer is behind you or inside of you, and then let it go. So it's nothing to do with sound, it's more like the action of bow hunting. Does that answer?
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
You use the word emergence in every talk I've heard you give, and I was wondering if you could say anything more about it. Is sound, listening connected to emergence, or what is this emergence?
Well, there's emergence stories. There's a lot of course, all over the world, different peoples have different stories of how they came to be where they are. The only one I know about is my own tribe's stories of emergence, of coming through different worlds, having different animals guide you through these worlds, different helpers, and importantly, what was gained through coming up through these different worlds. Think about this a lot because there's not ever a reference, at least in the Navajo creation stories, but I need to talk to more elders about this, is there's never a talk of going back, not going back into the hole we came from, which I think is interesting. But yet, sometimes we talk about going back to where some other time, celebrated 1491 or something like that. And, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know how sonically it all comes to be. Yeah, I have a piece that's literally a row of speakers coming out of the ground, and then they stop coming up and they go towards the east. I don't know. Yeah, speakers are, to me, that form, I guess, like the concentric circles of the repellent eye. I see some similarities there. Got an idea on that? On the emergence? No, that's a good question. I have to think about that one more. Yeah.
How would you define emergence?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I was just thinking, with in regards to creation stories, but yeah, not. I guess there's personal emergence. There's being born. We're all born and emerging from somewhere. That's a tough one, Judy. I don't know.
I'm sorry,
I don't-
man. You kept saying emergence. I didn't really. I actually didn't connect it to the idea of a creation story, because I hadn't heard that term before. I can throw in one more quick question, I guess, which is about this idea. Maybe somebody else can help me out, but it's like the idea of the drum and the speaker. Are they? Because the piece you have in the gallery has both a drum and. But you were also last night using this very specific speaker. I'm just thinking of somehow, eardrums, drums, speakers. Is there any interesting relationship, or what do you think about speakers? Because last night you were using a speaker as an actual instrument in a way.
Yeah, speakers. Every microphone can be a speaker. Every speaker can be a microphone. Very literally, you just wire them backwards or whatever. But speakers, I've been using these hyperdirectional speakers for anybody who saw the performance last night. Not as a way to speak to everyone. I like this instrument or this tool because I can just speak to one person. I can just aim it at you, and you'd be the only one to hear the piece of music. But then what I do with this instrument is emit pink noise, so you're the only one who can't hear what everybody else is listening to. I like playing with that idea. And then drums have been used in a lot of works, also post-commodity works, where they are the ultimate resonator. So much like a speaker works, they have this kind of membrane that vibrates, and that's where the sound comes from. So thinking of those as it's not so much like the resonance. I think it's more the membrane vibrating, receiving, but also emitting at the same time. And there's also this, I think we also titled a work, I don't even know if the title makes sense, but that's why we used it, was the Documenta piece with the LRADs. It's called The Ears Between Worlds Are Always Speaking. And quite like double contradictory statement or title, but we were influenced by Marianne Amiche, who has this theory that your eardrums are actually emitting sound that is creating the way that we hear things. So it itself is a speaker more than a receiver.
That's what I was thinking about.
Thoughts on speakers, drums, instruments, resonators?
The right to play something and not play something, that seemed like another thing a little bit going on. The right to play or not play the drum, that you've used a different drum in these works.
Oh, yeah. So to talk about the piece downstairs?
Yeah.
So the piece downstairs is, that you'll also have an opportunity to see after this, is a sound work for any musical instrument that is trapped in a museum collection and trying to let it sound once, because usually that's against the rules to let alone touch it, So whether it's a wind instrument or a drum. I like the drum because they don't want your lips on these things, so they let you maybe tap it. So with this particular drum, we recorded it with just a single hit. I think Cheyenne is the one hitting the drum with one single hit. Gets recorded and then looped into a timeline. And there's different listening stations around the city. The further away you are from the actual drum trapped in the collection over at the Museum of Anthropology, the faster the tempo of this recording is. Of course, we acknowledge and are grateful that the Museum of Anthropology allowed us to let this instrument sing again. And this is an ongoing kind of piece that, very site-specific wherever it gets exhibited. So it's been done twice. It was done in Colorado Springs with a Pueblo drum that they don't know when it was sounded before that, and then the Gitxsan drum here.
There's a project that I'm working on with my dad right now, and it's a sound. We're calling it sonic rematriation to my home territory, and it's spending time with belongings in museum collections, and we have one tool. It's a dog whip, and it was used as a sounding tool. And because of climate change, sound, and also how we're traveling and inhabiting our lands differently now, and so that means that the trees in some areas are getting wicked tall and thick, and so that's also changing how sound travels across our territories. They're also not getting as cold, so sound, there's twofold ways why the sound isn't traveling as far, and that it just takes one generation to learn to lose a tool. And that trying to learn even language that we have about specific tools, and that how that language is reflexive of those sounds, and trying to continue the sound of those words being activated in our territories, but also by visiting these museum collections and spending time with these dog whips, and we're not allowed to crack them in the space, but looking at them to remake them and then play that sound again for our territory, but then bringing them back to the museum and then sounding in those spaces, so that way our belongings also get to hear those sounds again. Because there's a really rad woman who's working at the Museum of Civilization or History now. And if you have work in their collection, you can email her and she will play music to your belongings. Yeah, so she was playing, it was really rad to get to talk with her. She just started there, and she said that, we can send her clips and she'll let our belongings hear some of our sounds again in that way. But so we're hoping to do some of those things in person. And then I also think a lot about how do we pull knowledge through our bodies? How do we pull knowledge through things like a drum or other sounders or other materials that are part of our cultural vernacular? And so working with contact microphones and or embedding contact microphones in the snow and driving a skidoo over them and using that in some of my soundscapes. I have a piece where I put a contact microphone on an antler and then use an angle grinder to grind it down. And I love the different tones that you can get depending on the density of the antler.
Yeah, I saw this, of course, in both your works, this idea of, how would we put it? You put it into words very well, but this idea of making something sound, but often it's really noisy too, because the grinder is really, it's kind of really noisy. It's not a delicate, the quiet you played from Standing Rock was so delicate. But then the works with the sounding of the materiality almost are quite noisy. They're depending on how you think about them, they're kind of abrasive and literally abrasive if you're grinding an antler. I don't know if you have anything else to say about that. This quality of being abrasive, is that?
Yeah, I just like it. Sounds good. No, I used to also use antlers as an instrument. I had an instrument that was a 3-pronged mule deer antler, and I would scrape it on glass. I would perform with this instrument. I did it for about 4 years, but then I'd get hassled at the border. They'd be like, how come you have an antler in your backpack? It was too big, starting to experiment too with actually having the piezoelectricity of the bone itself be the contact mic. So trying to get the properties of the bone or the antler to have that piezoelectric amplification property.
What does that mean, piezo? It's a kind
That's
of
how
microphone?
contact mics work. So yeah, don't ask me how it works, but magic.
In terms of that abrasive quality, though, I really love watching people at noise shows, and that you get some people who are just like so deeply comforted or does something where they're just like lulled to sleep, and then other people who just have to get out of there.
Well, noise does that. I mean, after a while, it becomes, you just get maybe overwhelmed in a way, or hear things that might not actually be there. It's like an oral hallucination in a way. I remember experiencing that at Deep Blue, where it felt like there were sounds that might not have even been there, but it was so loud that eventually I started to just hear them.
Yeah, for me, it started as a very literally juvenile thing. Into heavy metal and trying to form heavy metal bands with your friends. And it's just not brutal enough, and everybody sucks at playing, and it's out of tune, and a string breaks, and you just have one good bass string, and the drum heads are broken. Just got used to it. I don't know. I liked it. Yeah. I didn't know there were people doing that, like in New York or whatever.
Well, should we open it up to the audience a bit, and then we can keep talking about things that still come to us? Or did anybody have another impulse there? No? Well, let's hear what other folks have to say. Questions or comments. Or
I just
Cheyenne.
want to interrupt for 1 second to say that I didn't actually strike the drum myself. I was there in the room and organized all of it, but it was one of the people that work with the collection at the Mo that did the actual hitting of the drum.
That's cool. That's still cool. If they did it following the protocols of how it's supposed to be, not the museum protocols, but whatever the protocols, where the drum belongs, following that to the best of our knowledge that's my only ask. If I was in town, I would have asked to hit it, but I wasn't in town.
I wanted to ask one question too, which is about what it's like to show sonic work in spaces that are so oriented toward the visual. So I have spent a lot of time ruminating on the fact that with this exhibition, I have Raven, your scores and the performance notes on the wall as though they are art, but they're not. The art is the actual performance of the piece. And I was thinking, Jeneen, of the piece with the antler and the angle grinder. And I know that you request that it not be documented, but there are things that remain in exhibition spaces after those performances. Anyway, so I'm just wondering how you negotiate what it means to present your works in these kinds of spaces, or what matters or doesn't. Thanks.
Oh, I got to answer that one?
Well, I mean, you or Jeneen, just do you find that there is that it's difficult or not difficult, or what are the challenges of that, or Jeneen coming into the space and seeing Raven's scores on the wall, where you're like, whoa, that does that seem? How does that seem to you as someone who works with sound and somebody who thinks very precisely about what aspects of the sound can or cannot remain in an exhibition space?
I think art can often just hold the space of the gesture around the work, and that's often what's more interesting, or the work is a catalyst, and that could be a catalyst for sound, or even just for a viewer or somebody who's spending time with the work. The meaning always kind of happens around the work. I don't know if it, even for, it's called visual arts, right? It's so rooted in the ocular. But that, I think it's usually always about what's happening around a work. I also have to say it's really nice to be in this theater again, and that thank you, Auntie, for welcoming us, and that, yeah, I remember the first time coming into this hall and feeling like it felt very like big institution, like a bit alienating. Someone else came in and like talked about the problematics of Gold Corp, but that yeah, coming in here over time and then just seeing so many familiar faces and people in the audience that yeah, I didn't realize that this place could like also just feel a bit like a community center, which is really nice that it feels a bit less alienating now.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi. So I have a question for you, Raven, about the about your field recordings in the mountains, and I wonder if you could. Well, so it seems really curious to me that you would make these recordings in these places that were so big, and they, you know, the experience of being in these spaces is something that cannot really be documented in any way. Like there's no way for a document to communicate what it feels like to be in a place, and especially you know, the places that you were recording. And the fact that the recordings were so loud is so curious to me. And you, I think you said something along along the lines of that you wanted to let the land sing, and but also hide itself in its own information. So I don't know. That gesture seems so curious and just so strange to make this recording of this very quiet place, but that's also so massive, and just crank the volume up to 11. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that's how I describe them, 2 up to 11. I'm glad you said that. Yeah, I think maybe that's how this comes about. You know, it's that you can't capture the place, so you just do what you can and turn it up to its maximum. And then if the tools fail, or the technology has failed to let that be as grand as it's supposed to be, that's no fault of the place. That's the technology's fault. So you let it fail. And I think that's what's interesting to me too. Is there's no infinite amount of headroom that can exist to give the idea of these places and the history of these places and all of the beings that might be existing in that recording. It's confined to something that is obsolete already.
Hi, Raven. I had actually 2 questions in regards a bit to the gallery space downstairs. So just remembering a bit from the workshop, the notion that the scores that you composed for Zikalisha were to be given to each of the people that you've composed for, and that ideally they are the first ones to perform. My first question, because some of them hadn't yet been performed by the artist, what is like the relationship for displaying some of those scores that have yet to be performed in a gallery space?
Yeah. So thank you for your question. And I talked a lot about this in the workshops, which Lee was a participant in the workshops, but. Thank you for elaborating on this discussion we've been having over the past month about this. Is the last thing that the Zikalisha scores are is an instruction by me for the women I'm writing them for. That's the last thing they are. They're more aligning with the idea that a score can be transcriptive or descriptive of something, and then maybe in turn be prescriptive, maybe to something else, or the score itself is a filter for that transcription to be reenacted. So in doing so, in keeping with that, I wanted to form some kind of protocol around this exchange that I'm having with each of the people I'm speaking with and I'm learning from as they tell me their ways of navigating the 21st century. So for myself, that was a rule I had decided was of just how to present this, was that they would have the first opportunity to enact it and then give me their feedback of what they think worked and didn't work. And as far as I know, I mean, each of these composers are very different. Some are like, hey, you know, it'd be cool if you change this. And others, like my sister, like totally mysterious. I think she's performed it. She said, yeah, it's performed. Like, she's the deep web Chacon sibling. So you probably talked to her more than I talked to her. I don't know. She's just, yeah, she's bouncing around the country.
We emailed on Monday.
But so yeah, as far as I know, all the ones that have been performed already have already been premiered, performed by the person they were written for, even if that meant in the privacy of their own home. But there's more protocols to come from this. I mean, there was a thought that this was just to be performed only by women. That was a question that came up as I was talking with one of the composers, saying, we started thinking of these ideas. And as far as I know, there's no limitation on who can perform these, at least with everybody I've written the finished ones for, the 8 that are being displayed downstairs. None of them saw a limitation of who can be performing these. They have to be done by a soloist, though. It's only for solo performer. We broke that rule the other day with Judy and Rachel's version of For Carmina Escobar. But I allowed that for myself because I was curious what was going to happen with two screaming as quiet as possible. So I'm not so strict with it. I'm very open to learning from the collaborators about what it means. You know, I'm still wondering what it all means. And so there's a book. It's also a book project that is going to be a book of all of the scores plus contributions, written contributions from each of the composers will be published next year. Yeah.
Awesome. And the second question I have is an extension from Cheyenne's question, because of the fact that the scores are not necessarily, I mean, depending on your perspective, not necessarily the art, but the compositions that come from it are the art. So I wonder, with in a gallery space, would you feel like the scores could potentially be an invitation for gallery goers to even do some of that performance within that space, or potentially take the ideas from what they get from the score and maybe, as you said, like maybe go home and think about what that performance might mean for them?
Yeah, completely. I used to be very against showing scores in a gallery situation as art. And then I started getting asked to do that. And then I married a curator, and she was like, yeah, it'd be a good idea to show that in the walls. So then I decided then there should be some public programming around it, so, more Carfax fees or whatever it can be. No, seriously, in all seriousness, it was a way to then enact the piece, right? Because the score still isn't the artwork. You're right. The composition itself is the artwork, and the score is just the document that tells how to do it. So yeah, I encourage that. I don't think it's something, though, that needs to be outright said, like, you may perform this here in Audain and on the floor or something, but maybe more enacted as programming around the exhibition. And then it goes with the philosophy I've had of putting my scores up online for free anyway. So all of the stuff I've written, it's all up online. If a string quartet wants to play the Kronos piece, they just download it. Because yeah, it's not to be, I don't know, it's kind of open source, and it's an invitation for anybody to do it, So I see these Zikalisha scores will probably be the same. Yeah.
Do you ever get upset if people will perform a score, and then, like, do you ever get recordings of people being like, oh, hey, I performed this score of yours?
Yeah, all the time. Or they upload something to YouTube. I like it, I like it, unless they do it totally wrong, but I love it. Yeah, and that's, I mean, kind of the opposite happens too, where, for instance, Carmina did her version of her own piece, but that's not the canonic version of that way that needs to be played. I'm interested in all the interpretations of that, you know, and all of the understandings of what those scores mean, enacted or not enacted.
But they're so beautiful too. Like, I think about most charts I get from musicians, and it's like a scratch line on the paper, and the way they're just so visually beautiful.
Thanks a lot. It was something we talked about a lot in the score workshop as well. Was my feeling is they should have an intention and maybe some guidance. The thing I like the least is when there's just like a line and a scribble and like a splotch, and the composer says, "Play this." And it's like, yeah, that's my least favorite kind of score. But when there's some kind of guidance or some kind of instruction, orientation, I think every score should say how long the thing lasts. Even if it says this lasts forever, then that's still enough information to go off of. But yeah, some basic music parameters, if it is a music score, is helpful and hopefully included. Otherwise, it's just too open, and it loses my interest, at least as a performer or a visitor. But if it looks good too, hey, that's cool. You know, it's all the better. But it's really nice when there's scores that it doesn't have to look like the way the music sounds, but it has a logic to it. So I think of like maybe these Robert Ashley scores, the In Memoriam scores. You know, have this kind of instruction of all the parameters of music, of pitch, of where to stand, of all these kinds of ways you can move around, and yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And some of them are quite complicated, but I think that's part of the work to figure out how you perform these things.
I am also commenting on the visual beauty of those scores, and wondering if you feel any corrupting feelings from the visual arts towards your musical self.
Yeah, I mean, that was a post-commodity thing too. That's I learned a lot from working with those people, and also I love collaborating with other people who make music, and or work with moving image or any other medium. So no, it's not corrupting anything. It's influencing. Yeah, and I used to draw really well, but I guess I had no patience or something, and decided to learn instruments, so it's nice to get back into it and actually, draw these things. But I can send it off and get exhibited, Thanks.
We have a special ending, but are you going to set it up?
Yeah, I can talk about it a bit. It'll be interesting. So this is Raven's piece from 2006. It's a solo for guitar. I started working on it on Thursday. And it's interesting because there's gestures on the guitar, and it's really nice to play as a guitarist, music written by someone who knows how to write for this instrument. Because a lot of times you'll get things that are not possible to play, or that are, just not, they don't work on the guitar. So there's that aspect to it, but also a lot of the gestures in this piece aren't typical guitar gestures. Like, it's not like playing like an E chord or a power chord. They're unusual voicings, and that makes it really, really fun to play. But the other thing about it is that there's so much space in it, and it got me thinking a lot about like what it means as a musician to really know how to hold silence in a piece. And yeah, that's just something that I was thinking about when practicing it. So I'll play it now.